Episode 128 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. How are you all doing? It's good to be back with you. I've been a bit lazy for the last couple of weeks, had other stuff to do. So we're back in the thick of it today. Now, I have been swamped. I've been inundated recently here at the Interpretation Station headquarters with people asking me what on earth has happened to His Excellency, his ambassador and plenipotentiary, Mr. Dwayne Parker, the head of the International Interpretation Station fan club worldwide. Where's he disappeared to? Well, the good news, ladies and gentlemen, is that I can report that Dwayne Parker is indeed still very much in business. He's doing very well. And he recently provided me with a new statement, a new recording for me to go through. And what he's provided us for this episode today is a statement by Emmanuel Macron, the French president. And this is a statement that Macron delivered. That's back in 2019, actually. It's a few years old, but it's a very good statement. So it was delivered at the UN. It was during the General Assembly in September of 2019, and they always have the parallel summit. There's always a summit parallel to the general debate, and this was on climate. So lots of climate change vocab you're going to be hearing about, lots to do with the energy and all that kind of thing. Some sort of themes that I perhaps haven't focused on that much in previous Interpretation Station episodes. Maybe I have, but anyways. Now, why have I chosen this speech? It's a very good speech because although it is a prepared speech, the way that Monsieur Macron delivers it would have you think that he's actually saying what he has to say, and he's making it up sort of off the cuff. I think Macron, like many sort of political leaders nowadays, he's he's half politician, half actor. The way he delivers it, he can deliver these prepared speeches in such a way as to almost deceive the listener into thinking that it's all just coming to him in the moment, right? There's so many sort of these phrases that he uses, lots of interesting little colloquialisms, you might say, that would make you think, as I say, that he was speaking spontaneously. And it's very fun to do these kinds of things, to look at some of these sort of throwaway little comments, these little almost asides to the audience that he makes, and to see how we would cope with them in English. It's tough because he goes quite fast at times, and it's a really good exercise in seeing what sort of stuff you can leave out. You really need to draw on all your skills here, all the tools you have to leave out what's redundant in what he says. Also, here and there, you got to do a bit of paraphrasing. You also got some interesting idioms he uses to see how you would cope with them. So it's a really good test of the various of your toolkit, shall we say, as an interpreter. So as per usual, I'm going to leave the links to the original statement and to the transcript in the description box. My advice to you is that you go and listen to the original statement first, record yourself interpreting it, okay, and then come and watch the show. Come and tally what you have done with what, say, Dwayne has done, and with the tips that I give you, and see if you can learn some new techniques, see if you can learn some new words, phrases, etc. Okay? So the next voice you'll be hearing will be Mr. Dwayne Parker's. You will see the text of the original statement come up on screen, and let's get the show on the road. So just before we actually start the review of Dwayne's performance, it is still me, by the way. Okay, look, I've had a haircut, I've had a shave, so I'm actually filming this 2 days after I filmed the rest of the episode, because I've been sort of agonizing over the last couple of days about this episode, because you know what, this was one of the toughest episodes I've had to film, one of the toughest reviews, just because of it's really the Macron sort of style of speech here makes it's very difficult. And I just wanted to sort of make it clear as to how I'm going to approach this in the rest of the episode. So I'm not going to be focusing so much on what Dwayne misses out, the way Macron speaks. You'll see yourself if you try recording yourself, if you try interpreting the speech. You find you have to miss stuff out to keep up with Macron. You will find that you will have to paraphrase. Now, it's always, you have to be careful with paraphrasing. In an ideal world, you shouldn't be paraphrasing when you're interpreting, but that assumes that that your speaker's going at a reasonable pace and you can stick with him. You will see that in a statement like this, you have no choice. You do have to paraphrase, because suddenly you find yourself at the end of a sentence, and sometimes you just have to sort of knit a couple of the main ideas that you've heard in passing together to get some of the information across, so that then you can begin the next sentence. And the problem is, it's just really Macron's choice of words often, and I don't think it's not just Macron. It's just, I think sometimes the way of speaking of the sort of very educated French upper classes, it can translate it can be often very clunky to translate into French. And it's interesting, okay, because I looked up a couple of articles about Macron's sort of speaking style, and there's one I found here in the Irish Times, okay, the Irish Times of all places, where it says, at his best, Macron can hold and move an audience, as in his September 2017 address on the future of Europe at the Sorbonne. But he can also be incredibly verbose, packing 2-hour speeches with minutiae comprehensible only to experts. A French diplomat who has observed 3 French presidents interact with Angela Merkel says only Macron matches her wonkish command of detail. And you really see both these aspects in this speech that's coming up, because on the one hand, it's quite delivered in it's delivered quite passionately, but also there are these phrases that he uses, these structures that are very difficult to put into English. So right ahead, I'll give you some examples. And this is part of the challenge, right? So, elles disent une urgence absolue. So, in English, it wouldn't sound right to say they're saying an absolute emergency. You have to think, how would I put that better into English? An English speaker would probably say they're ringing an alarm bell. Okay, that's just an idea. Here's another one. La dénonciation à laquelle aucune action au fond ne suffit à répondre. It's really convoluted, right? A grievance that no action deep down can ever be enough to satisfy. We talk about satisfying grievances. Je crois qu'il y a un agenda d'action qui n'est pas dans la satisfaction de lui-même ou dans le contentement. Okay, if you say that, word for word, there's an agenda for action which is not in the satisfaction of itself or in contentment. If you say that in English, that your listeners are going to think, what? So really, it's such a challenge to put that into semi-coherent English. I'll say when we come to it, it's not a question of an agenda for its own sake. One final example I'll give you. Again, I highlight this during the episode. C'est indispensable si l'Europe veut être à la hauteur de ce qu'elle se doit à elle-même. So if you're going to go word by word, you're going to say it's vital if Europe wants to be commensurate to what it owes itself. Oh, Lordy. I mean, to an English native speaker, that's just going to sound like, whoa. And so these expressions, you have to find either some way of reflecting it well in English. So the solution I'll give is if Europe is to live up to its own responsibilities, or you'll see like Dwayne just goes for something really short, is up to the task. And thinking about these things over the last day or two, I think this doing something like this must be very difficult if you're a French A, English B watching this, because if you just go word for word with this kind of statement, you're going to leave the listener I think a bit confused and so the conclusion just before we get started that I would say is that, especially as I say, if you happen to be a French A, English B listening to this, really practice this kind of statement with a colleague. I think it's good for this kind of thing to find a French A and an English A to practice this kind of stuff together, so that you, the French A, the English B, to make sure that what you're saying actually makes sense, sounds coherent in English. Because see the statement actually word for word, if you just take every word that's in it on its own merits, it's not actually that difficult. There's not that many words that I'd never heard of in the text. But just all certain sections as a package, they're a real struggle to think exactly how you would put them into good English. So I just wanted to say that before we started, just to preface the rest of the episode, because this kind of statement, it's really deceptively very difficult. Actually, looks easy, as I say, if you just look at it word for word, but then when you get into it, trying to decipher it, add that to the speed that it's delivered with, it makes it a real challenge. So, okay, with that, enough of this chatter. Let's continue then with the rest of the episode.
Dear colleagues, heads of state and government, ministers, dear friends, just a few words. First, I was really hit by the emotion when several of our young people spoke out. And each week, in each month, the youth are speaking out. And I think
Okay, so just a couple of things in these first opening sentences. Frappé de l'émotion. So Dwayne said he was hit with emotion, which is good. Maybe struck with emotion is what we might say. I always think you could just synthesize those three words into one. Maybe I was very struck by what those youngsters said. I was very moved. Okay, that's a good just way of that's a good little shortcut to use, I think, in these circumstances. And then again, another interesting expression it uses a couple of times: se sont exprimés. Lorsque quelques-uns des jeunes se sont exprimés. And then he says it again, pendant des mois, depuis des mois, nos jeunesses qui s'expriment. And Dwayne went with they've been speaking out. And I think that's I think that's the best solution for it. I mean, I was thinking in English we would probably say, you know, when we were, this is obviously a reference to these climate protests that were inspired by Greta Thunberg. And I think in English we were often talking about, you know, taking to the streets, taking to the streets. I was thinking here, could you say that here? Depuis des mois et des mois, nos jeunesse qui s'exprime, at least in this second use of s'exprimer. Maybe, I mean, you could perhaps. Certainly would be in context. Is it a bit of a leap? I don't know. I think it's perhaps safer to stick with speak out, but that's certainly the expression that you would be hearing a lot in English when describing what the people were doing during those strikes.
that they are expressing an emergency that we don't always know how to respond to.
Okay, une urgence absolue. Yeah, an emergency. I think that's a good solution. Now, this expression, so again, he's going fast, all right? So Dwayne has basically cut his losses and he's just gone on to the next sentence. Okay, tout va bien, regardez, on fait ce qu'il faut. So I guess he's saying here, everything's fine, look, we're doing what needs to be done, I guess you would say. This is what I mean about these sort of throwaway, these little asides like you get in Hamlet, when they're almost that he's moving from the prepared speech, okay, to these sort of direct comments almost to the audience on a sort of personal level. I think, you know, everything's going to be fine. We're doing what needs to be done.
He says one thing: you're not moving fast enough. Even when you are aware of what's going on, you're not moving fast enough. And you are not responding to the challenge in the appropriate way. So I don't believe that.
Okay, so yeah, the aside continues. You know, when he talks about, mais quand vous êtes conscient de ce qui ne va pas. Okay, so even though you're aware that something's not even though you're aware of something not working, you're still not going fast enough. Now, this bit, vous ne nous associez pas suffisamment. I guess here, you're not including us enough in your responses. Here, for example, it says, vous ne nous associez pas suffisamment aux réponses que vous apportez. Here's a classic example where you could just basically leave out this que vous apportez. This style of speaking, it's perfectly coherent thing to say. You're not including us enough in your responses. You don't need to render the que vous apportez, in my opinion. And then he says, okay, donc j'en prends aussi ma part et je l'entends. And okay, I accept my share of the blame, I think is what he's basically saying there with j'en prends aussi ma part et je l'entends. And then, so again, I was thinking to when I did it, he's speaking, as I say, very extemporaneously here, very quickly. And okay, imagine that you just missed it, and then he's on to the next sentence, and you're trying to keep up with him. I think you'd be justified, for example, et donc j'en prends aussi ma part et je l'entends. I think, the very minimum you could do here is you could say, look, I hear you. Okay, I think that would just about sufficiently encapsulate what he says there. So you just have to think sometimes, if you're losing it, and then is there some way you can express his message without using the same words, but which still get across the same gist, the same meaning. So I think here you could, if you were panicking or starting to panic, just say, okay, and I hear you.
Any political leader can shirk their responsibility. So I think that collectively, our young people, our societies, our companies, our investors, our heads of state and government must be able to rebuild what the understanding of the world is and to change our ways of acting together.
Okay, this is an expression he's going to use a couple of times here. Ne peut rester sourd à cette exigence. Okay, so Dwayne says, okay, they cannot shirk their responsibility for justice among generations. But again, he couldn't perhaps come up right then and there with the best equivalent for rester sourd. I think here the best thing to say is this, they cannot ignore this demand for justice among generations. Okay. Next sentence is good. Nos entreprises, so he says our companies, our businesses, either or.
Because if not, we could have a conversation between where people are speaking out and no one is responding, and on the other side, we have actions which are not enough, and we're looking at ourselves saying, look, so the only way to...
And in fact, just going back to rester sourd à cette exigence, I guess actually perhaps the closest counterpart in English might be to turn a blind eye, or to turn a deaf ear. Do we turn a deaf ear to this demand? Maybe to turn a deaf ear to this demand for justice between intergenerational justice. And this last bit that we did, okay, okay, and then he uses this same sort of idiom, un dialogue de sourds pour longtemps. So here I was thinking, otherwise we risk having this disconnect for a long time. A dialogue de sourds, I think the best solution usually when you hear that, and you hear it quite a bit, dialogue de sourds, is probably talking at cross purposes. Otherwise, we're going to be talking at cross purposes for a long time. But failing that, I think maybe you'd say like there's a disconnect between okay, la dénonciation à laquelle aucune action au fond ne suffit. Okay, between okay, les dénonciations, I would say here perhaps grievances that no action will ultimately be able to respond to, and on the other hand, a list of actions which are never enough and for which we will always be saying to ourselves, look, we've already done enough. So again, this regardez, on a déjà bien travaillé. Like it's interesting, how you would render that. Look, we've already done enough. We've done what needed to be done.
To be able to act with our society and our young people is to understand, what we don't understand, how we're going to change our collective system to respond to this priority, to fight against climate change and to protect our biodiversity, and how are we going to build our tools. We need our
Yeah, so looking at this sentence here again, it's coming very quickly. Perhaps the only way to have useful summits to act usefully with our societies and our youth is also to talk about what we understand, what we don't understand, how to try to transform our collective system to respond to this. Dwayne said imperatif, to this priority, and I like that. This priority for combating climate change, for biodiversity, and how together we can build useful action.
youth to tell us that we need to move quicker. We need them to say that you need to change things, to act, to put more pressure on and understand what's not moving. And this
Okay, coming in quick and very thick and fast. So again, we need the youth in our countries to tell us to move faster. We need that youth to help us to change things. Okay, so then he has a list of these verbs, doesn't he? So à réparer, à agir, à mettre plus de pression. Okay, so under these circumstances, you can probably drop one of those. Okay, just to make your life a bit easier. À réparer, maybe to fix things, to mend things. And to put pressure on those who don't want to bouger, qui ne veut pas bouger, who don't want to act, maybe you could say. States, financiers, financeurs, entreprise, business.
framework, what we've done, us three here, under the mandate of the SG of the UN, is to try to move forward. And
Yeah, when he says something like dans ce cadre-là, I mean, at the speed he's going. So Dwayne says, okay, in this framework, I think I would just say here, okay, here, what the three of us have been doing has been blah, blah, blah. Under the mandate of the SG, Secretary General, maybe just use the acronym.
I believe that there is an action agenda which must be a positive agenda.
Okay, so he gets a bit lost as to how to render n'est pas dans la satisfaction de lui-même ou dans le contentement. So how would we perhaps do that now with the benefit of hindsight? It's always much easier in hindsight, isn't it, when you're just looking at it here on the screen? I think in English maybe we would say we have an agenda of actions which isn't just there for its own sake, but which rather can be an agenda for positive action. An agenda of action which isn't about simple self-satisfaction. I mean, what he says is he basically says the same thing twice: satisfaction de lui-même ou dans le contentement.
First, we must, as heads of state and government, change the quickness of our response. We must remain in the Paris Accord and be fully in line with its goals. First, I am pleased by the ratification of the Paris Accord by Russia. This is amazing news. This shows that things are moving forward. And you can applaud.
That's not something you'll be hearing very often these days at the UN. Someone calling for a round of applause for Russia. That was back in the day. Anyway, what does he say here? Changer la rapidité, change the speed of our response. Rester dans l'accord de Paris. I think I just said we have to we have to stick to the Paris Accords and be fully en conformité, in line with its goals, fully consistent with its goals.
Second thing, if we want to move toward carbon neutrality by 2050, we have to move quickly. We have to work with Chile, Japan, Italy, and I think that China is in the process of moving, and this is an essential element is in this framework.
Okay, on a bâti cette coalition qui ne cesse de grandir, which keeps growing, this coalition which keeps growing. We've been, avec le ralliement du Chili, Japon, you could say we've been joined by Chile, Japan, Italy, the G7 in Biarritz, India gave very strong signs. La Chine est en train de bouger. Maybe you could say, I know that China is on its way. Maybe it might sort of convey that meaning in English.
Europe must do more. And starting 2020, Europe must make clear decisions to be able to go towards increased reductions of emissions by 2030.
Ok, exaucer les vœux de la nouvelle présidente. Ok, exaucer les vœux, to fulfill the wish, live up to the wish of the new president, van der Leyen. Perhaps I would say, again, if I was going fast, I'd maybe drop the Ursula, just say President van der Leyen. And of course, à horizon 2030, just by 2030. You don't need to do anything fancy with à horizon, just say by.
And this means that Europe must make decisions next year to go faster and further with its ambitions, a minimum price on carbon, CO2 emissions. This is necessary if Europe wants to be up to the task. And
yeah, this bit's very tricky again. This gets quite technical here. Some references. I didn't know this. Sur un ETS ambitieux. I had to look this up. So an ETS is apparently an emissions trading system. So I think this is to do with what we often call in the English-speaking world, it's to do with cap and trade, emissions trading. I think you get credits for the amount of a company, for example, receives a certain amount of carbon credits that it's allowed to use over the course of a year, and it can sell those credits, in fact, if it doesn't need them all. And so you have a market where the various companies can buy and sell those carbon credits. So I think that's what he's referring to. So an ETS, emissions trading system. And then he talks about a mécanisme d'inclusion carbone aux frontières. And that is actually, as it says in the French, it's a carbon inclusion mechanism. And I'll just read you what a carbon inclusion mechanism is. The proposed system, called a carbon inclusion mechanism, would require importers of goods manufactured outside Europe to buy pollution permits from the EU's emissions trading scheme for carbon dioxide. So there you go. It's sort of it applies to non-EU countries and how they the sort of permits they need to buy if they want to trade in Europe. And veut être à la hauteur de ce qu'elle se doit elle-même. Now, again, that's a very convoluted way of saying. Okay, so Dwayne just says it's vital if Europe is going to be up to the task, which I think by itself is probably good enough. I was thinking, how might we say that in English? It sounds like it's a very French way of saying something. I don't know if there's a identical way of rendering that into English. Perhaps live up to its own responsibilities was what occurred to me. Might be the most sort of English way of expressing that idea.
France is taking assuming its responsibility.
Yeah, France is assuming its responsibility, or if you want something different, is shouldering its responsibilities.
We are banning exploration of on French soil. Now, the second element of this
Yes, he's struggling. Dwayne's struggling a little bit here to keep up with the speed. And so what I might say here is, and here again, dans ce cadre-là, I just say here. France is okay, assuming its responsibilities. We've already stopped all new hydrocarbon exploration. Now, you see, do we say hydrocarbon? I think it's something they talk about more in French than in English. I think you probably could hydrocarbon exploration. I think we talk more about fossil fuels, though. Perhaps we've stopped all new fossil fuel production on French soil. And this is an interesting expression. Okay, dernière centrale à charbon. Okay, so when he said it, when I was doing it, I knew exactly what he's talking about, but it just wasn't coming to me in the moment. The expression that we use in English for those, so it's power stations that create electricity that are powered by fossil fuels, that are powered by carbon, charbon, and rather by coal. Sorry, coal. And the expression that we use in English is coal-fired. So France shut the last of its coal-fired power stations. Okay, it's come up here and there actually when they've, and I think it might be talked about more because this is one of the big things that countries are aiming for. Because obviously a lot of the electricity that we use is produced from they burn coal at the power station, and so in English you call that a coal-fired plant, coal-fired power station.
positive agenda is to have a trade agenda which will be at the service of fighting climate change.
I like what he did there with an agenda commercial. I think trade sounds better than commercial. A commercial agenda. I think a trade agenda.
A large part of us believe that we have an open world, a world of exchanges, trade, which will allow us to bring many of our citizens out of poverty.
Yeah, when is an échange an exchange and when is it a trade? That's a good question. It's not always clear. So I think he said exchanges because then he talks about commerce, which is also trade. So I think either or in this case. Ce qui est un vecteur de paix, which is a vehicle for peace. Not to be confused when they talk about vector to do with missiles. You often hear about vector talked about to do with like disarmament, non-proliferation. Okay, a vector is a delivery system in that context. But here it's like, well, I guess it's the same idea, kind of. It's like a vehicle. It brings peace. And sortir beaucoup de nos concitoyens de la pauvreté, and which has helped many of our fellow countrymen, of our fellow citizens, emerge from poverty.
Nonetheless, today, it should be noted that our young people and even us don't understand this world anymore. We want to regain control.
Okay, force est de constater. Yeah, I mean, I usually say we regret to note. It pains me to say that our youth, just to give you a couple of ideas, because again, in French, that's quite a commonly. I mean, Dwayne, I think, paraphrased it a little bit. He didn't specifically render force est. I think he said like we should note. So just generally, force est de constater is like we regret to know, or it pains us to note.
And we want to have regional sovereignty and to control this and have it make sense. And we cannot have a trade agenda.
Du contrôle du soi et du sens. I think maybe meaning. It needs to have we want meaning.
That goes against our climate agenda. We must, in our trade, be consistent.
Yeah, cohérent again. When they say cohérent in French, I think the best solution in English tends to be consistent.
I'm not in favor of new trade negotiations with countries that are against the Paris Accord.
Yeah, je ne suis plus favorable. I'm no longer supportive of, perhaps you would say in English, as opposed to, you just say, I no longer support les pays qui sont en contradiction avec l'accord de Paris. maybe you'd say who are in violation of the Paris agreements.
That is a deep hypocrisy of the entire debate that we are having today and the previous days.
You know, notice here how this is very good. He just drops, je pense que ce serait une hypocrisie profonde. Okay. We know he thinks that. That's what, you know, he's talking, okay? So I don't think you hardly lose anything by just leaving that, I think that. So it would be profound hypocrisy. Again, this is sort of good intuitive thinking here by Dwayne. Again, he realizes that's just something that's well, 3 syllables that he can at least save, and you know, all these syllables add up over time. So again, think intuitively as to what you can drop.
And we must build on a European level an agenda, a trade agenda that seeks zero carbon emissions. This is key. This is a deep change. It's a true revolution, and it doesn't mean stop certain actions, but it means to say that certain actions can have a negative impact on deforestation, and we have to compensate and integrate.
Okay, just a couple of small things here. Un changement profond. I think we say maybe a profound change. Okay, Dwayne said a deep change. I think we're more likely to say profound change. Maybe you'd also say for un changement profond, a seismic shift, a true revolution. And then, okay, I think this is an important word in all things to do with climate. Il faut que ce soit, so he's talking about the negative impacts on deforestation. Il faut que ce soit compensé. It needs to be offset. Offset's one of the kind of buzzwords in climate vocabulary and the whole issue of climate. So I think that sounds better than compensated.
If not, we will continue to have beautiful speeches and a trade agenda that does exactly the opposite. And finally, when it
this is one of those. This is one of these nice expressions. Sinon, nous continuerons à avoir des beaux discours. Literally, we'll continue to have nice speeches. And I'm thinking again, well, how do you say that in English? And maybe we would say something along the lines of, you know, we'll continue to say all the right things. I think that's the sort of equivalent thing that we say in English, right? You know, we'll continue to. Another thing we say, talk about lip service. We'll continue to pay lip service to all these things, but have a trade agenda which does exactly the opposite. But yeah, I don't think we would say specifically we'll continue to have nice speeches. I think we talk more about saying all the right things.
comes to financing, we must get in line with our actions.
Yeah, on cohérence avec nos actions. Again, I do like consistent for cohérence. I think we just need to be consistent with our actions.
And being consistent means
Oh, there he goes. He says consistent.
stop financing foreign carbonated projects.
Okay, carbonated projects. This made me slightly giggle. No, made me think of fizzy drinks, right? But I mean, it's fair enough. I mean, if you hear that and then like, you think, Jesus, how would we say that in English? Because I had the same problem actually when I came to. I think I said carbonized infrastructure, but when I said carbonized, I knew that doesn't sound right, does it? And then I had to think, and then I think we just say carbon-based infrastructure. We need to stop financing carbon-based infrastructure projects abroad. I think that's the best solution there.
We can't say that we are for fighting against global warming, and we're for biodiversity and continue to finance in other country infrastructure that pollutes, that increases CO2 emissions, and it does exactly the opposite of what we want. So we must, in our trade and finance agendas, we must, when it comes to the International Development Finance Club, where commitments were made yesterday to financing 100 million per year by 2025.
So just one thing I'd say here, I think he's a bit uncertain when Macron says sur ce point, nous avons franchi une étape dans le cadre de l'international development finance. I get the feeling he's not certain where it's going to go, and he just sort of he leaves it, he skips it out, and hopes he can sort of make up for it once the sentence becomes clearer to him. But I think if you hear franchir une étape, I think you just want to say to take a step. We've taken we took a step in the in terms of international development finance, where commitments were undertaken and announced yesterday. 1,000 milliards de dollars. Okay, so there's a few numbers here that get a bit tricky. So this is a milliard is a billion, right? So 1,000 milliards is going to be $1 trillion by 2025. 1,000 billion, right? That's 12 zeros. That's a trillion, right? And then he himself gets a bit confused, Macron, when he's speaking, you'll notice.
So we are on the path, but it's a first element, and we're going to speed up investment into renewables to continue with fostering the access to financing. There are many countries here.
Okay, I like what he says for énergie renouvelable. It just says renewables. You don't have to say renewable energies in English. We just call them renewables. And retrait du charbon. I was thinking how you would say that. Continue to scale back coal. Perhaps would be a good way. Favoriser l'accès. So again, this is a word where I like to use foster. That's my sort of go-to solution for favoriser generally. The F and the F of the two words, for me, that triggers when I hear the F in favoriser. It brings to mind the word foster. So I wonder if Dwayne was taking advice from the interpretation station when he said that. I hope so.
Here who are committed to this agenda, and this is absolutely essential.
On a beaucoup de pays ici auxquels nous tenons beaucoup, that we hold very dear. I was thinking that we value this agenda, which is absolutely essential and which we value highly.
Prime Minister of Jamaica and will speak to us about our mandate regarding the 100 million that needs to be mobilized to help developing countries and to have an agenda of climate justice and social justice and true development. And
so, yeah, I think in the original, does Macron say million? But anyway, 100 milliards is 100 billion.
The immediate priority is the Green Fund. We will have a conference in Paris in a month. Governance has been reformed, and to have more effectiveness and accessibility, Germany, the UK, France have doubled their contributions. France will put 1.5 billion euros in the fund. Norway has also doubled its contributions. Yesterday, Denmark and Sweden have doubled their contributions. The Netherlands has increased their contributions as well. At this moment, $7 billion. We have $7 billion, and we want to reach 10 billion. And we have good news when it comes to the Americans.
Okay, so you skipped this bit. Pour aussi compenser le retrait américain. I guess it's to offset the American withdrawal. So I guess this was back in 2019 while Trump was still president, and of course Trump withdrew America from the Paris Accord. So that's what that reference is to.
But I want each of you who have not already done so, I'm calling on each one of you who have not done so to increase your contributions to the fund. And I know that my friends from Qatar are going to do this as well. So I'm counting on each one of you to action. We cannot.
So I like what, yeah, des actes. I think action sounds better than acts. So good night. That's nice one, Dwayne.
Allow our young people to spend their days demonstrating. We don't want to leave them suffering. We are far from achieving our goal, and we must act together. Thank you.
Okay, so there you have it. Tough statement there. Tough statement from the Macron. What I think I might do just to conclude is I might just give you a quick run through of my own idea off the cuff, my own version of how I would do this. To sort of replicate booth conditions slightly for me, so you can sort of compare and contrast. Obviously, what Dwayne and I did, obviously with me having the benefit of actually just being able to read the text, but let's see how I would do if I just had to do this statement, as I say, off the cuff. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government. Ladies and gentlemen, ministers, dear friends, in just a few words. First, I was very moved just now when some of our youngsters spoke out. I had the chance to speak with a few others. We have in many of our countries every week for months and months our young people taking to the streets, and I think they're expressing an absolute urgent need that we must respond to here, that we cannot respond to here by just saying everything's going to be okay. It's an emergency which is telling us one thing: you're not moving fast enough. Even though you're aware of what's not working, you are not going fast enough. And it tells us also, no doubt, and they're telling us also, you're not including us enough in your responses. And so I take my share of the blame, and I hear you. I think that any responsible politician cannot ignore the demands for justice between generations. And I think today that collectively our youth, our societies, our businesses, investors, heads of state and government must be able to rebuild what is a shared understanding of the world, change our habits to act together. Because otherwise we risk having a disconnect for a long time between grievances for which no single action is enough as a response, and on the other hand, a list of actions which are never enough, and for which we say to ourselves, look, we've already done a good job. The only way to have useful summits to act helpfully with our societies and our youth is therefore to discuss what we understand, what we don't understand, how to try and transform our collective system to meet this imperative need to combat climate change, for biodiversity, and how together to shape useful action. We need our youth in our countries to tell us to go faster. We need this youth to help us change things, mend things, to act, put more pressure on those who don't want to act: states, financiers, business. And here, what we've done over the last 3 months, what the three of us have done in recent months under the mandate of the SG, is specifically to try and move forward. And I think that there is an agenda for action which is not just there for its own sake, but could be an agenda for positive action. First, we must collectively, heads of state and government, change the speed of our response, stick to the Paris Accords, and be fully consistent with its goals. First, I'm pleased today that we had good news about ratification of the Paris Accords by Russia. Great news. That wasn't expected a few months ago. That shows that things are moving. You can give them a round of applause. Second, if we want to act if we want to act and move strongly, we need to move towards carbon neutrality 2050. We've built this coalition which continues to grow. We've been joined by Chile, Japan, Italy, at the G7 in Biarritz. India gave some strong signals. I know that China is moving, and that's a key element. And here, Europe must do more. So in 2020, Europe will take very clear decisions so it can live up to the wishes of the new president, van der Leyen, to move towards increased emissions reductions by 2030. The famous minus 55% in 2030 will mean Europe will have to take decisions next year to move more quickly, more surely, towards an ambitious ETS, a minimum carbon price that we must increase, and a carbon inclusion mechanism on borders. It's crucial if Europe is to live up to its own responsibilities. And here France will assume its responsibilities. We've already stopped all new fossil fuel exploration on French soil, and the last coal-fired power plants will close their doors by 2022. Now, the second element of this positive agenda is for me to have a trade agenda which is for the benefit of the climate agenda. I believe in any case, the vast majority of us believe in an open world, a world of trade, of a world where specifically we trade, which is a vehicle for peace, which has allowed many of our fellow citizens to emerge from poverty. Nevertheless, today we're forced to note that our youth, sometimes ourselves, we don't understand how the world works anymore. We want to collectively take back control. We want both sovereignty at regional level and self-control ourselves and have meaning. And therefore, we can no longer have a trade agenda which runs counter to our climate agenda. We need our exchanges, we need our trade to be consistent. I'm no longer supportive of there today being increased new openings in trade negotiations with countries that are in violation of the Paris Accords. It would be a profound hypocrisy for all the debates that we're currently having today and in previous days. And we must build, at least at European level. It's at this level, as France, that I'm talking to you, and that we've had useful action, a commercial agenda which aims at zero carbon and zero imported deforestation. That's crucial. It's a profound change. It's a seismic shift, a genuine revolution. But that doesn't mean that we stop importing certain activities completely, but saying that when we import and that when a certain activity can have a negative impact in terms of deforestation, it needs to be offset and be integrated. Otherwise, we'll continue to say nice things on the one hand and have a trade agenda which does exactly the opposite. And that is essential work. Finally, on a financial level, we also need to be consistent in our actions. This need for consistency, to stop financing abroad carbon-based infrastructure projects. We cannot say here that we are fighting against climate change, that we're for biodiversity and continue, on the other hand, once we're back at home, to finance in other countries infrastructure that pollutes, which increases CO2 emissions and which does exactly the opposite. Therefore, so we have to do it ourselves, each one of us, in our trade and financing agendas. And here we have taken a step in the context of the International Development Finance Club, where commitments were assumed and announced yesterday to finance $1 billion for the climate by 2025. That's a first gesture. So there's still a way to go, but it's a first element. We will accelerate investment into renewable energy, the continued drawdown of coal or scaling back of coal, foster direct access for countries of the South to international financing. We've got a lot of countries here who are committing to this agenda, which is absolutely essential and that we value greatly. Soon the Jamaican Prime Minister and the Emir of Qatar will be taking stock of our agenda. Okay, rendre compte, that's always good for to take stock of our agenda and of our mandate on the 100 billion that needs to be mobilized by 2020, which is essential to help developing countries to catch up and to have a agenda for climate justice and social justice and for true development. One last word in conclusion. The immediate priority is the Green Fund. The recapitalization conference will take place in France in a month's time, 24th, 25th of October. Its governance has been reformed this summer to make it more effective and accessible. The Germany, UK, France have doubled their contribution. France will put 1.5 billion euros into the fund. 80% in the form of donations. Norway has also doubled its contribution. Yesterday, Denmark and Sweden also joined the countries who've doubled their contribution. The Netherlands have increased theirs. We have, as we speak, we're on $7 billion. The target is $10 billion to offset the American withdrawal. There might be some good news from the US, I hope, during this General Assembly. But therefore, I call each one of you who hasn't yet done so to increase your contribution to the Green Fund. I know that our Japanese friends expect a great deal from this also, and they're expected to make their announcement, their pledges, maybe. I know that the Emir of Qatar has great news also, so I'm counting on each one of you. I'm counting on action, action, action. We cannot just let our youth spend their Fridays protesting. We cannot see our youth in a state of suffering sometimes, the emotions that we saw earlier, and just say to them, everything's fine. There's still a long way to go, but let's continue to act together. I thank you. Okay, so that's my sort of version of that difficult statement. So as I say, I very much recommend that you give it a try yourselves. I say that you then come back and watch the tips that I've given you. As I say, hopefully you'll learn something. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please do give me a like, smash the like button, subscribe, and share with your friends. As I say, it was good reconnecting there with the head of the Interpretation Station fan club worldwide, Mr. Dwayne Parker. Give him a round of applause, just like they gave the Russians a round of applause. And that's it for today. So all that remains to be said is that episode, 128 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.
The train is now leaving the interpretation